The moon didn't have a name anyone cared about. It had one, technically. A designation stamped into a database 11 years ago by someone who had never seen it and never would. A string of numbers and letters that meant something to navigation systems and supply chains and nobody else. The kind of name that existed because something had to be written down in the box labeled location. But the soldiers who fought there didn't use it. They called it nothing. Not as a joke. Not as slang. Just nothing. Because that's what it was. Nothing worth having. Nothing worth defending. Nothing worth remembering. And yet people kept dying there. The ground was the color of dried blood left too long in the sun. Not fresh red. Not even dark brown. Something older. Something that had stopped trying to be anything else a long time ago. It cracked under boots in long, jagged lines, like the surface of something that had once been alive and had since given up. There had been vegetation once. You could still see the shapes of it if you looked closely. Low, brittle growth, clinging to the edges of rocks, gray and thin and half buried under ash. But 11 years of war had stripped most of it away. Weapons fire, chemical runoff, constant movement of armored units, grinding the surface into dust. Whatever had lived here before had not survived long enough to matter. The sky didn't help. It hung overhead in a permanent shade of sick yellow, like something was wrong with the light itself. Not bright enough to be day, not dark enough to be night. Just a constant, dull illumination that made everything look slightly off, like the world had been left out too long and had started to spoil. There were no birds, no wind most days, no sound except what the war brought with it. And when the war stopped, even for a moment, the silence that followed was worse, because it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that comes after something loud enough to shake the ground has finally ended, and your ears are still trying to remember what quiet is supposed to sound like. That silence settled over the plains often now, not because the war was ending. It had been going on too long for that. 11 years of pushing lines forward and backward across terrain that didn't change no matter who held it. 11 years of small gains and small losses that added up to nothing measurable except the number of dead. No, the silence came because both sides were tired, not in the way people say when they mean inconvenience or frustration, not the kind of tired that goes away with sleep or time away from the line. This was a deeper thing, the kind that settled into bones and stayed there, the kind that made every decision feel heavier than it should be. They still fought. They still followed orders, still moved when told to move, still fired when told to fire. But something had worn down over the years. The belief that this place mattered had gone first. Then the belief that winning here would change anything. What remained was habit, obligation, the simple fact that the other side was still here. And as long as they were, you had to be too. The moon sat on a border that existed mostly on maps. On one side, human-controlled space, systems connected by trade routes and defense networks, colonies spread across planets that had once been empty and were now full of people who called them home. On the other, the territory of the compact, for species older than humanity in some ways, newer in others, bound together by agreements that were as much about keeping each other in check as they were about presenting a unified front to outsiders. The line between them had never been clean. Borders rarely are. But this moon, this nothing, had ended up sitting close enough to matter symbolically. And that was enough. No resources, no strategic advantage, no population to protect, just a line. And once a line exists, people will stand on it, even if standing there means dying for something that has no value beyond the fact that it is contested. Especially then. The first units had landed here 11 years ago under orders that had made sense at the time. Establish presence. Deny the enemy a foothold. Hold the line. Simple objectives. Clear language. The kind of instructions that look solid when written on paper far away from where they will be carried out. The first casualties had followed within weeks, then months, then years. Reinforcements came and went. Rotations cycled through. New soldiers arrived with the same briefings, the same maps, the same explanations of why this place mattered. Most of them understood within a few weeks that it didn't. But by then, they were already here. And leaving wasn't part of the plan. The front line wasn't a clean trench or a defined boundary. It shifted constantly, sometimes by meters, sometimes by kilometers, depending on what had happened the day before and what someone somewhere had decided needed to happen next. There were ridges that changed hands, so often no one bothered naming them anymore. Crater fields that expanded with each engagement until they overlapped into something that looked less like terrain and more like damage. Scattered structures, temporary shelters, observation posts, supply points that were built, destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again in cycles that blurred together over time. Everything about the place resisted permanence, except the dead. They stayed where they fell more often than not. Not because anyone wanted it that way. There were protocols for retrieval, for identification, for returning remains when possible. Both sides had them. Both sides followed them when they could. But when they could, was doing a lot of work. Sometimes the ground was too exposed. Sometimes the fighting didn't stop long enough. Sometimes you simply didn't know where to look. So the dead became part of the landscape. Another feature of a place that had too many features like that already. The soldiers learned to step around them without looking directly, learned to keep moving, learned not to think about who they had been before they ended up here, because thinking about that made everything heavier, and everything was already heavy enough. There were days when nothing happened. No artillery, no aerial strikes, no movement from either side beyond the bare minimum required to maintain positions. Those were the days when the silence pressed in hardest, when you could hear your own breathing inside your helmet, when the sky seemed closer than it should be, when the ground under your boots felt less like solid rock and more like something waiting. Those were the days when people started to think, and thinking in a place like this was dangerous because it led to questions. Why are we here? What changes if we leave? What are we actually holding? There were no good answers, so most people stopped asking. They focused on smaller things instead. The next supply drop, the condition of their equipment, the people in their unit, the routines that filled the hours between orders. It was easier that way. Simpler. The war became a series of moments rather than a single, continuous thing. A patrol here, a skirmish there, a quiet stretch that lasted just long enough to forget what the last loud stretch had felt like. And then the loud would come back. It always did. The explosions would tear through the silence, shaking the ground, filling the air with dust and heat and noise. Weapons would fire. Commands would be shouted. Movement would become urgent again. For a while, everything would feel sharp, clear, alive, and then it would end, and the silence would return, heavier than before, because now it carried the memory of what had just happened. The cycle repeated often enough that it stopped feeling like a cycle. It just felt like the way things were. The moon didn't change. It didn't care who stood on it. It didn't care how many people died trying to claim it. It remained what it had always been. Nothing. But it was a contested nothing. And that made it important in a way that nothing else could be. Because once people start fighting over something, its value stops being tied to what it is and starts being tied to what it represents. And this place represented a line, a boundary, a statement that one side would not give way to the other, even if holding that statement required sending people to stand on ground that had no reason to exist beyond the fact that it was there, even if it meant those people would never leave. The war had been going on long enough that no one on the front lines remembered what it had felt like at the beginning. There were records, of course, reports, footage, historical summaries, compiled by people who studied these things from a distance. They described early engagements in terms of strategy and positioning, talked about initial objectives and projected outcomes. They made it sound like something that could be understood, controlled. But the soldiers on the ground didn't think in those terms. They thought in terms of distance. How far to the next piece of cover? How far to the enemy position? How far they could run before their lungs gave out? They thought in terms of time. How long until the next rotation? How long since the last meal? How long they could go without sleep before it started to affect their reactions? They thought in terms of survival. Everything else was background. The bigger picture existed somewhere above them, in command structures and strategic planning sessions, and data models that tried to predict outcomes based on variables that didn't include the way a person feels when they realize they might not make it back. Up here, on the surface of a moon that had no name anyone cared about, the war was smaller, more immediate, more real, and also, in a strange way, more meaningless. Because when you stripped away the language and the objectives and the reasons given for why any of this was happening, what remained was simple. People were here, other people were there, and neither side was leaving. That was it. That was enough. The rest was just explanation. And explanation didn't change the ground under your boots, or the sky over your head, or the fact that, sooner or later, something loud would happen again. It always did. And when it did, the silence that followed would be waiting. Heavier than before. Always heavier than before. She had been in the crater for 6 hours when she stopped trying to move. Not because she had decided to, because her body had. There's a difference. Private Dara Ohin lay on her back at the bottom of what had once been an impact site, and was now just another hole in a surface full of them. The edges of the crater were jagged. Broken rock fused into unnatural shapes by heat and force. The kind of place that offered just enough cover to keep you alive if nothing else happened. And nothing had happened for 6 hours. Her right leg was broken. Not cleanly, not in the way training simulations showed, where damage was neat and contained and could be stabilized with a practiced motion and a steady hand. This was different. The bone had snapped in 2 places, and something inside the suit had shifted wrong when she'd tried to crawl the first time. After that, the pain had gone from sharp to something deeper, something that didn't fade. Her suit had sealed the worst of it. Pressure maintained, blood loss slowed, basic medical protocols engaged. But it couldn't fix what was broken. Her radio had died sometime during the first hour. She wasn't sure exactly when. She remembered trying to call it in, position, status, need extraction, and getting nothing back, but static that cut in and out before going quiet entirely. She'd tried again, and again, adjusted frequencies, checked connections. Nothing. After a while, she stopped trying. The battery indicator had been flashing red anyway. Even if it had worked, it wouldn't have lasted long enough to matter. She had used her last field bandage 3 hours ago, wrapped it tight around her thigh where the suit integrity had been compromised. The material had sealed as best it could, reacting to the pressure and forming a temporary patch. It held. Mostly. Good enough. Good enough was a standard she had learned to accept quickly after arriving here. Good enough meant you were still alive. Anything beyond that was a bonus. She was 19 years old. That fact felt distant, not unimportant, just not relevant to the current situation. Age mattered in other contexts. In conversations about future plans, about experience levels, about what someone should or shouldn't be responsible for yet. Out here, in a crater on a moon that had no reason to exist beyond the fact that it did, 19 didn't mean anything. She could have been older, younger. It wouldn't have changed the position she was in. Still, she thought about it sometimes, not in a dramatic way, not with regret or fear attached, just as a detail, something to hold on to that connected her to a version of herself that existed somewhere else. Before this, she had grown up in a coastal city, not the kind you see in advertisements or travel feeds, not the polished version presented to people who wanted to believe the world was cleaner than it was. A real city, crowded, loud, alive in a way that came from too many people sharing too little space and making it work anyway. The air had smelled like salt and fuel and food cooked on street corners. There had always been noise, voices, music, traffic, the constant background hum of a place that didn't stop just because it was late or early or inconvenient. She had liked that. The noise. It meant things were happening. It meant people were there. The silence here was different. Heavy. Empty. She had a brother. Older. By 3 years. He had joined the military first. Not out of some grand sense of duty or belief in the cause. Not because he had sat down one day and decided that this was what he wanted his life to be. He had done it because it was there, because it was an option that came with structure and purpose, and a clear path forward in a world that didn't always offer those things easily. She had followed him. That was the simplest way to explain it. She had always followed him into things, not blindly, not without thinking, but with a kind of trust that had been built over years of shared space and shared experiences, and the understanding that, whatever happened, they would be in it together. That had been the idea. Anyway, the reality had turned out differently. Different units, different assignments, different parts of a conflict that was too large and too spread out for something like proximity to be guaranteed. They had seen each other a few times over the years, between rotations, during transfers, in those brief windows where paths crossed, and there was just enough time to confirm that the other person was still there, still moving, still intact. It had been enough. It had to be. She hadn't seen him in months now. That thought came and went without much weight. Not because it didn't matter, because there was nothing she could do about it from the bottom of a crater with a broken leg and a dead radio. Actionable thoughts were prioritized here. Everything else was background. The sky above her was the same sick yellow it always was. From this angle, lying flat on her back, it filled her entire field of vision. No horizon, no landmarks, just a continuous stretch of dull color that didn't change no matter how long you looked at it. She had spent most of the last 6 hours watching it. There wasn't much else to do. When the pain got bad, and it did, in waves that came without warning and left slowly, she would press her face into the dirt. The ground was dry, fine particles that shifted under pressure and stuck to the surface of her helmet. She would breathe through it, slow, controlled, in and out, the way they taught in training for managing stress responses and maintaining focus under adverse conditions. It worked, not in the sense that it made the pain go away. It just made it manageable, reduced it to something that could be endured rather than something that demanded immediate action. When the wave passed, she would lift her head again, look back at the sky, repeat. Time didn't move the way it was supposed to. She had a timer in her suit. It tracked elapsed time since last confirmed command signal, since last biometric check, since last successful communication ping. The numbers changed. She could see them, but they didn't feel real. 6 hours. It could have been less. More. The only thing that marked the passage clearly was the movement of light. Subtle shifts in the color of the sky. The way shadows stretched and then softened. The indication that, despite everything else, the system this moon belonged to was still functioning as expected. Orbital mechanics didn't care about war. Stars didn't adjust their patterns based on who was winning or losing. That consistency was something. She wasn't afraid of dying. That had been decided earlier, not consciously, not as a statement or a conclusion reached through deliberate thought. It was just understood, a fact that existed alongside others. She was injured. She was alone. Her communication was down. Extraction was uncertain. Possibility of survival, low. That was the assessment. Clear, simple, acceptable. Fear wasn't useful here. It didn't change variables. It didn't improve outcomes. So it was set aside. What she was afraid of was something else. Not being found. Not in a philosophical sense. Not about legacy or memory, or what people would say after she was gone. Something more immediate, more practical, being left here, in this crater, until systems failed, until her suit could no longer compensate, until her body simply stopped, without anyone knowing exactly where, without anyone marking the location, without anyone coming back later and saying, "This is where she was." That thought stayed. It sat somewhere behind everything else, quiet, persistent. When the pain eased enough for her to think clearly, it was there. When it spiked and everything else narrowed down to breath and endurance, it was still there, a constant. She shifted slightly, not much, just enough to adjust the angle of her shoulders against the uneven ground. The movement sent a sharp line of pain up her side and into her chest. She stopped, waited for it to pass. It did. Eventually, everything did. That was another thing she had learned here. Nothing stayed at the same intensity forever. Not pain, not fear, not even the noise of battle. Everything peaked. Then it dropped. The problem was what came after. Sometimes it was relief. Sometimes it was something worse. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to rest them. The inside of her helmet was dimmer than the sky outside, less harsh, easier. Her breathing sounded loud in the confined space. Steady, measured. She focused on that. In, out, in, out. There were protocols for situations like this. Injury, isolation, communication failure. They had drilled them repeatedly during training. Assess damage, stabilize, signal, wait. She had done all of that. Assessment, complete. Stabilization, partial. Signal, failed. Wait, ongoing. There were no further steps. No hidden actions she had missed. No additional options to consider. The process had reached its end. Now it was just time. She opened her eyes again. The sky hadn't changed. It never did. Not in ways you could see quickly. It required patience, something she had more of now than she had expected to need. She wondered, briefly, what it looked like from above, from orbit. If anyone was watching, if this place looked as empty from that distance as it felt from here, or if the signs of conflict were visible, the scars on the surface, the movement of units, the patterns that meant something to people who understood how to read them. She didn't know. It didn't matter. Her world, right now, was the interior of this crater and the strip of sky above it. Everything else existed somewhere beyond that. Abstract, distant. She adjusted her breathing again. In, out. The suit compensated automatically, maintaining oxygen levels, filtering out contaminants, keeping everything within acceptable ranges. For now, there were limits. There were always limits. She knew approximately how long she had before those limits became relevant. She chose not to think about it in exact numbers. Approximation was enough. Exactness made it feel closer, and closer wasn't useful. She shifted her attention back to the sky, watched the way the light moved. It was thin, weak, nothing like sunlight back home. That thought came with a memory, not a full one, just a fragment. Light reflecting off water. Movement, color that wasn't this dull, constant yellow. It passed quickly, replaced by the present. The sky above her, the ground beneath her, the steady rhythm of her own breathing. Time moved, slow, uncertain. She heard the ceasefire before she believed it. It came through the emergency channel, a long, steady tone. No words, no language, just a sound that every soldier on both sides had been trained to recognize without thinking. It cut through the static like something clean in a place that had forgotten what clean felt like. For a moment, she thought it was something else. Interference. A malfunction in her failing comm system. But it didn't fade. It held. Steady. Unbroken. She lay there, staring at the sky, listening to it, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The tone continued, echoing faintly inside her helmet as the system picked it up through channels that still functioned, just enough to carry signal, but not enough to carry voice. Ceasefire. 6 hours. Standard procedure. The words surfaced automatically, drilled in during training, repeated in briefings, reinforced by experience. When the tone sounded, the shooting stopped, not always immediately, not always perfectly, but enough. Enough to allow movement, enough to allow retrieval, enough to allow people to cross open ground without being turned into targets. She exhaled slowly, didn't realize she had been holding her breath. The sound continued. Somewhere beyond the edge of the crater, she heard something else. Movement, distant at first, then closer, not the sharp, chaotic noise of combat, something more controlled. Voices. She couldn't make out the words. Too far, too distorted by distance and the limitations of her damaged systems. But the tone was different. Not urgent, not aggressive, directional, coordinated. People moving with purpose rather than reacting to immediate threat. The ceasefire had taken hold. That meant they would come. Eventually, that was the protocol. Wounded were retrieved first. Those who could be reached quickly. Those whose signals were still active. Those whose positions were known. She didn't have a signal. Her radio was dead. Her suit wasn't broadcasting location data anymore. She was just here. A crater among hundreds. Indistinguishable from the others unless someone already knew where to look. The thought surfaced again. Not being found. It pressed in for a moment. Then she pushed it back. Ceasefire. 6 hours. That was time. Time was something. She listened. The movement grew louder. Closer. She could hear the sound of boots on loose ground. The faint scrape of equipment being carried across uneven terrain. The low, controlled exchanges of people working within a system they understood. Medics. Had to be. They wore different markings. White panels over standard armor. Visible from a distance. Recognizable. Protected. That was the point. Wounded combatants were no longer combatants. Medical personnel were not targets. The rules were clear. Both sides had agreed. Both sides had signed. Years ago. On paper. In meetings held far away from places like this. But the rules held. Most of the time. Enough that people believed in them. Enough that a tone like the one still echoing through her helmet meant something real. She turned her head slightly. The movement sent another line of pain through her body. But she pushed through it. Needed to see. The edge of the crater blocked most of her view. Just a jagged line of rock and dust against the sky. But there. Movement. A figure passed across the edge. White marking. Then another. And another. They moved quickly, but not carelessly. Scanning. Checking. Working methodically across the field. She couldn't see their faces. Helmets identical to her own. Visors reflecting the same sick light. But the way they moved was familiar. Purposeful. Trained. She tried to raise her arm. Signal. The motion got halfway before her body stopped cooperating. Pain flared. Sharp enough to make her vision narrow. She dropped it back to the ground. Breathing. In. Out. Wait. They would come closer. They were working in patterns. Grid search. Standard. Covering ground systematically. They would reach this crater. Eventually. Time. She had time. The thought settled in. Not fully comfortable, but better than what had been there before. She watched the edge of the crater. Waited. The sounds grew louder. Closer. A voice. Clear enough this time to recognize language. Check that one. Then footsteps. Right above her. She couldn't see the person yet. Just the shadow falling across the lip of the crater. Then a face appeared. Helmet. Visor. White marking across the chest plate. The medic looked down. There was a pause. Brief. A fraction of a second where assessment happened. Injury. Position. Condition. Alive. Then movement. Fast. Efficient. The figure slid down into the crater beside her, boots displacing loose dust as they landed. Another followed. 2 medics. Standard pairing. One knelt beside her immediately, hands moving to her helmet, then to her suit interface, checking vitals, reading what systems were still reporting. The other moved to her leg, stabilization kit already in hand. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. They had done this before, many times. The one at her side spoke, voice filtered through comms, clearer than anything she had heard in hours. "Stay with me." Simple, direct, not a request, a statement. She focused on it, on the sound, on the presence. The medic's hand came up, resting briefly against the side of her helmet. A check, eye response, awareness, standard. Then, another voice, different, closer, Dara. The name cut through everything else. Clear, familiar. She turned her head, slow, careful. The movement felt heavier than it should have, like it mattered more than just changing where she was looking. The second medic had shifted position, moved into her line of sight. Same armor, same markings, same helmet, but the way he held himself, something about it. She knew it before the visor cleared, before the helmet came off, before the face was visible. Recognition didn't need confirmation. It was already there. "Hey," he said. Just that. No urgency, no panic. Just, hey. Like they were meeting in a place that made sense for both of them to be. Like this was normal. Her brother. He didn't say anything else. Didn't ask questions. Didn't comment on her condition. He reached out, placing his hand against the side of her helmet. Same motion the other medic had used. But different. Less clinical. More. There wasn't a word for it that mattered right now. He held it there for a second. 2. Then he pulled back. Got to work. Hands moving quickly. Precise. He knew what he was doing. Of course he did. That was why he was here. The other medic was already securing her leg. Stabilizer locking into place. Pain spiking again as the broken bone was forced into alignment. She sucked in a breath. Held it. Let it out slowly. "Easy," her brother said. Still calm. Still steady. Like the situation was under control. Like this was just another task. Something to be completed. She focused on his voice. On the sound of it. It helped. More than anything else had. So far. The tone in her helmet continued. Ceasefire. Still active. Time was still there. The world had shifted. From waiting. To being found. From uncertainty. To something else. Something that felt. Not safe. Not yet. But closer. They worked quickly. Faster than she would have expected. Or maybe time was still distorted. Hard to tell. The stretcher came next. Compact. Folded into the medic's pack. Until needed. Deployed in seconds. Positioned beside her. "On 3, her brother said. To the other medic. Not to her. 1, 2. They moved her. The motion was careful. Controlled. But it still hurt. No way around that. She gritted through it. Focused on breathing. On staying present. On not letting the pain pull her under. They secured her in place. Straps tight. Support where needed. Her brother checked the connections one more time. Then looked at her. Through the visor. She couldn't see his eyes. But she knew where they were. What they were doing. Checking. Confirming. Still here. Still alive. He nodded once. A small motion. Then the two of them lifted. The world shifted again. Angle changing. Sky tilting as they carried her up and out of the crater. The edge passed above her. The wider field came into view. More movement. More white markings. Figures moving between craters. Carrying others. Marking positions. Working within the window they had been given. The ceasefire tone continued. Steady. Unbroken. The ground moved beneath her. Or she moved above it. Hard to tell. The motion was smooth enough, consistent. They were heading back, toward the line, toward something that resembled safety. She kept her eyes open, watched the sky, watched the movement, watched the world that she had been lying in for 6 hours from a new perspective. It looked different from up here. Less enclosed, less final, more. There wasn't a word for it. Not yet. Her brother didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. The steady rhythm of their movement, the controlled environment of the retrieval, the knowledge that she was no longer alone. That was enough. The last thing she remembered clearly was the light, the way it shifted as they moved, the sick yellow softening slightly as the angle changed. Then, less. The edges of her vision dimmed, not suddenly, gradually, like something being turned down. The sounds faded next. The tone, the voices, the movement, all of it pulling back. She didn't fight it. There was no reason to. The process had moved forward, from waiting to being found, from being found to being taken. The rest would happen without her needing to be conscious for it. That was acceptable. The last clear thing she registered was the pressure of her brother's hand on her shoulder. Brief, steady, then nothing. The ceasefire had been arranged 3 days earlier, through the usual channels. Neutral relay station at the edge of the system. Automated protocols. Verified signatures from both sides. Terms agreed, recorded, transmitted, acknowledged. 6 hours. That was the window. Long enough to retrieve the wounded, to collect the dead where possible, to mark positions that couldn't be reached in time. Not long enough to do anything else. That was the point. The rules were simple. They had to be. Wounded combatants were not combatants. Medical personnel were not combatants. The flag meant the shooting stopped. No exceptions. No reinterpretation. No, in this specific case, adjustments. That was how it had worked. On this moon. On others. On stations and outposts. And places that had never been meant to see conflict, but had found it anyway. Both sides had followed those rules. Not perfectly. Nothing in war was perfect, but consistently enough that the system held. Consistently enough that when the tone sounded, people moved out into open ground with the expectation that they would not be fired upon. That expectation mattered. It was the difference between chaos and something that could still be called structured conflict. The difference between a war and something else. The breath did not find it complicated. They found it incorrect. Sub-Executive Vral stood on the observation ridge, overlooking the plains. The elevation gave him a clear view of the field below, cratered terrain stretching out in all directions, movement patterns of the human retrieval teams visible as small, controlled shifts across the surface. White markings, easy to track, easy to count. He had already counted them. 41, most of them medics. A few carrying stretchers, others moving ahead, scanning, marking, coordinating. Efficient, organized, predictable. He watched them for several minutes, without speaking, without moving. His species had evolved for colder environments. Their bodies reflected that. Long limbs, broad, flat cranial structures, layered plating that served as both protection and temperature regulation. They did not express emotion the way humans did. Not visibly, not in ways that were easily interpreted by those who had not spent years studying them. But Vral was not without internal processes. He observed, he evaluated, he reached conclusions. That was what he had been trained to do. 9 years in this position. 9 years of conflict with humans. Long enough to understand patterns. Long enough to recognize deviations. He did not consider himself cruel. That was not a useful classification. Cruelty implied intent beyond function. He did not act beyond function. He acted within it. Practical, logical, necessary. Those were the parameters. He looked at the field again, at the movement of the medics, between the craters, at the stretchers being carried, at the wounded being lifted, stabilized, removed. He processed the information. A wounded human would heal. That was established. Their biology allowed for recovery from injuries that would terminate other species. It had been observed repeatedly, documented, accounted for in strategic models. A healed human would return to combat. That was also established. Training, conditioning, cultural factors. They did not remove themselves from conflict permanently after injury unless physically incapable of returning. A human who returned to combat would continue to engage, would continue to eliminate breath personnel. That was the nature of the conflict. 41 wounded humans recovered, healed, returned. 41 trained combatants reintroduced into the operational environment. 41 future threats. Preventable. The calculation was straightforward. No variables outside the known parameters. No unknown factors. No need for speculation. He did not hate them. Hatred was inefficient. It introduced noise into decision-making processes. He did not require emotional investment to reach conclusions. He required data. He had it. He reached the conclusion. He turned slightly. His weapons officer stood several steps behind him, waiting. The officer had also been watching the field, also understood the situation, also knew the rules. That was the point of rules. They were shared, recognized, followed, or not. Engage, Vral said. He did not raise his voice. There was no need. The command was clear. The officer did not hesitate. Orders were executed. That was how the system functioned. The first shots hit the medics. Clean, precise. From this distance, the impact was almost abstract. Small disruptions in movement patterns. White markings dropping. Stretcher falling. Bodies following. Then more shots. Controlled. Systematic. Target selection was simple. White markings first. Then the wounded being carried. Then anyone moving toward them. The field changed. Order became something else. The ceasefire tone was still active, broadcast across all frequencies. Unbroken. The flag was still visible, raised, recognized, meaningful. To one side, on the ridge, Vral continued to observe. The calculation had been completed. The action had been taken. The outcome was as expected. 41 future threats, reduced to 0. Efficient, logical, necessary. He did not look away. There was no reason to. Observation was part of the process. Verification. Confirmation that the action had achieved the intended result. Below, the movement stopped. Not immediately. There were moments, fragments of time where individuals reacted, turned, reached. But it did not last. The field settled. The ceasefire tone continued. Unchanged. The flag remained. Unlowered. In Vral's assessment, nothing had interrupted the ceasefire. He had not engaged active combatants. He had resolved a future threat. The parameters, as he understood them, remained intact. He would file the report accordingly. Clear language, accurate description, field-efficient neutralization of future combatants. That was the classification. Precise, sufficient, on the eastern edge of the plain, inside a sealed observation structure. Senior observer Loren Sai watched it happen. Her station was part of the agreement. Neutral, recognized by both sides. A place from which the ceasefire could be monitored and documented. Her role was defined. Observe, record, report. She had been doing this for 6 years. Different locations, different conflicts, same procedures. She was calm, careful. Her reports were known for their clarity, for the way they presented information without distortion or interpretation beyond what could be supported by direct observation. She watched through recording equipment calibrated to capture multiple spectrums. Visual, thermal, motion tracking, all of it feeding into systems that would store and timestamp every moment. The first shots registered. She did not react immediately. Misfires happened. Equipment malfunctioned. Even during ceasefires, there were errors, isolated incidents. She had documented them before. She continued watching. The pattern did not match error. It matched intent. She saw the medics fall. One. Then another. Then more. She saw the stretchers drop. The wounded hitting the ground again. Some moving. Some not. She saw individuals attempting to reach them, falling in turn. The field shifted from ordered retrieval to something else entirely. She continued recording. Her hands rested on the console, still, flat against the surface. She did not input anything. Not yet. Her training dictated immediate documentation, real-time notation of events as they occurred, time stamps, observations, initial classifications. She did none of that. Her hands did not move. They remained where they were, pressed against the console, as if holding them there required effort. She had seen death before, large-scale engagements, casualty counts in the thousands. She had processed those events, filed reports, moved on to the next assignment. This was different. The flag was still visible. She could see it from her position. Unmistakable. White. Raised above the field. Broadcast systems still active. The tone still sounding. The agreement still in effect. The rules. She knew them. She had studied them. Enforced them through documentation. They were not complex. They did not require interpretation. She watched the last movements on the field slow. Stop. The weapon's fire ceased. The silence returned. It settled over the plain with a weight that her systems could not measure, but her perception registered anyway. She remained at the console, hands still pressed flat, breathing steady, controlled. She waited, not for something to happen, for the absence of happening to stabilize. 40 minutes later, she began her report. Her hands moved, fingers finding familiar inputs, systems responding, recording playback available for cross-reference. She wrote, clear, precise, chronological, what she had seen, in the order she had seen it, time stamps attached, visual documentation linked, no speculation, no interpretation beyond observable fact. That was the standard. She followed it. At the end of the report, she paused. The final section, additional observations, optional, not required. She had not planned to include anything beyond the standard format. Her role did not extend to commentary, but something had shifted. Internally, something she had not yet categorized. She added a note. The humans on the ridge who observed the field did not call out, did not fire, did not advance. Approximately 16 individuals, all within visual range. They remained in position. They became still, not the stillness associated with shock, not the immediate freeze response. Something else. Sustained. Deliberate. She reviewed the line. Considered removing it. It did not fit standard reporting structure. It introduced an element she could not define. She left it. I have studied human behavior patterns for many years. I cannot identify what I observed. I am not able to name it. I want the record to reflect that I observed it. She saved the report, transmitted it through the designated channels, sat back in her chair. The field outside remained unchanged. The flag was still flying. The tone had finally stopped. The silence that followed was complete. On the ridge, the humans had not moved. They stood where they had been, looking down at the field, at the white markings that were no longer moving, at the bodies that had been retrieved and then dropped, at the space where the rules had existed and no longer did. They did not speak. They did not signal. They did not act. They simply remained. Still, Colonel Sarah Vance heard the shots before she understood them. They reached her as sound first, distant, flat, out of place in a moment that wasn't supposed to contain them. She was in the forward command shelter when they started, reviewing positioning updates, supply adjustments, the kind of work that filled the quiet periods between active engagements. Necessary, routine, structured. Then the sound cut through it, not loud enough to shake the structure, not close enough to trigger immediate defensive response. But wrong. Wrong in a way that bypassed thought and went straight to recognition. She stood before the second shot finished echoing. By the third, she was already moving. Out of the shelter, up toward the ridge, past personnel who had also heard it and were beginning to react without fully understanding why. No alarms had been triggered, no engagement protocols activated, because there wasn't supposed to be an engagement. The ceasefire was active. 6 hours. They were less than 1 hour into it. Her boots hit the slope at speed. The ground shifted underfoot, loose dust sliding over rock that had been broken too many times to hold steady anymore. She adjusted without thinking, kept moving. The ridge came into view, the line where the ground dropped off into the open field beyond. She reached it just as the last shots ended. The silence that followed hit harder than the sound had. She stopped at the edge, looked down, and saw 41. Her mind cataloged it automatically, not as a number first, as positions, white markings, stretcher locations, spread pattern, then the number 41, most of them medics. The white panels on their armor were dark now, not from dust, something else. The stretchers were overturned. Some of the wounded were still partially secured to them. Others had fallen free. There was no movement, not the kind that mattered, not the kind that indicated recovery. Her training held. It had been built for this, for the moment when you arrive at a scene and your mind wants to do something else, anything else, but you force it to observe first, to record, to understand before reacting. She took it in, all of it, positioning, spacing, impact patterns, directionality of fire, origin, the ridge opposite, breath position, clear line of sight, no obstruction, deliberate, not random, not accidental, deliberate. Lieutenant Chun reached her position seconds later. He stopped just behind her, didn't step forward immediately, didn't look past her at first. He looked at her, waiting, because he hadn't learned yet how to look at things like this directly, not the way she had. He said nothing. She said nothing. They stood there, looking. The soldiers along the ridge had already gathered, 16 of them, all within visual range, all seeing the same thing. None of them moving, none of them speaking. This wasn't shock. Shock had a different quality. It was immediate, chaotic, voices raised, questions asked, movement without direction. This was something else, something that came after shock, after the initial impact had passed through, after the system had processed what it was seeing and found no category that fit. The stillness settled in, not forced, not commanded, shared. Vance turned away from the field, not because she was finished looking, because she had seen enough, because the next step wasn't here. It was inside, in the shelter, at the console. She walked back, measured pace, not rushed, not slow. Chin followed, still silent. Inside, the shelter felt smaller, the same equipment, the same layout, but something in the space had changed. Or maybe it was just her. She sat at the communications console, activated the channel, not to breath command, not to field coordination, to compact high command, the combined authority, all 4 species. She wanted the message to go where it could not be filtered or redirected through layers that would soften it. The channel opened. There was a brief delay. Standard. Routing through relays. Confirming connection. Then, active. She didn't speak immediately. There were many ways to say what needed to be said. Many words available. Explanations. Descriptions. Accusations. She chose none of them. She said, "You should not have done that." 6 words. Clear. Unambiguous. She closed the channel. Did not wait for response. Did not invite discussion. There was nothing to discuss. Chin shifted in the doorway. Finally spoke. "Colonel, what do we do now?" She was already opening another channel. Earth. Actual command. Not local. Not sector. The level where decisions were made that extended beyond immediate tactical response. "We report it," she said. Her voice was steady, level, the way it always was when the situation required clarity. "We report everything exactly as it happened." She began compiling, pulling data, visual feeds, sensor logs, observer report from the neutral station. Lorenz-sized transmission had already come through. Clean, precise. She attached it. All of it, she continued. No interpretation, no adjustment, just the record. Chin nodded, moved to assist. He understood that much. Documentation, accuracy, chain of transmission, the rest. He wasn't there yet. She paused for a moment, just a moment. Her eyes moved away from the screen, back toward the direction of the ridge, toward the field. 41. She would learn their names, every one of them, before the day ended. She already knew two. A medic named Yusef had treated her once, months ago. A cracked rib. He had talked through the process, made her laugh, which had hurt, which had made it better. And Dara, 19, from a coastal city, found in a crater by her brother. She didn't know if Dara had made it. The report hadn't come through yet. It would, soon. She returned her focus to the console, finished attaching the last of the data, prepared the transmission, and then Chin asked, quiet, careful. She considered the question, looked at the screen, at the files, at the record of what had happened, at the evidence, at the line that had been crossed. "And then we wait," she said. She sent the report, transmission confirmed, out of her hands, into the system, into the chain that would carry it beyond this place, beyond this moon, beyond this war as it had been understood up to this point. And we see what kind of people we are. The shelter was quiet again. Outside, the field remained still. The ceasefire flag had not been taken down. Not yet. It hung above the plain, unchanged, as if it still meant something, as if the rules it represented had not been broken. On the breath side, Vral filed his report. Clean language, efficient, field-efficient neutralization of future combatants. No deviation, no acknowledgement of violation, because in his framework there had been none. The parameters remained intact. The ceasefire had not been interrupted. The logic held. The action was justified. He transmitted it, closed the file, moved on to the next task. In the compact diplomatic chambers, the message from Vance was received. Among many others, routine transmissions, status updates, operational summaries. This one was flagged, not for content, for brevity. 6 words. Unusual. It was assigned to a reviewer, then escalated. Eventually, it reached Ambassador Dhari 7. He read it. Once. Then again. Then a third time. "You should not have done that." He had studied humans for 30 years. Their history, their conflicts, their patterns. He understood how they responded to loss, to provocation, to negotiation. This did not match any category he had. It was not anger, not grief, not strategy. It was something else. He pulled up an old document, human, centuries old, from a time before space travel, before contact, before any of this. A list of rules, things that were not allowed, protected categories, the wounded, the healers, those who had surrendered. He had read it before, considered it a historical artifact, evidence of early attempts at structuring conflict. He read it again, slowly, carefully. Something in his internal processes shifted, not fully defined, not categorized, but present. He began composing a message. To High Command. He chose his words carefully, professional, precise. "I am not certain what I am observing," he wrote. "I am not certain I have a category for it." He paused, considered, continued. "I am advising that this incident be treated not as a military event, but as something else." He sent the message, sat back, thought about the field, about the stillness on the ridge, about the 6 words. "You should not have done that." He did not sleep that cycle. He remained at his desk, reading, reviewing, trying to fit what he had seen into a framework that could explain it. He could not, and that, more than anything else, concerned him, because humans were predictable, not individually, but as a collective. Patterns existed. He had built his understanding on those patterns. They had always held. Until now. Now something had changed, and he did not yet know what that change meant. Only that it mattered. The flag was taken down 4 hours after the last shot. It had remained in place, visible, unchallenged, as if both sides were waiting for something, for someone to acknowledge what had happened. No one did. Not there. Not in that moment. The field returned to silence. The bodies remained. 41 names, recorded in different languages, on different reports, under different classifications. On the human side, they were listed simply. A column, no annotations, no descriptors, just names, under a single heading, ours. The moon remained what it had always been. Nothing, but something had been added to it now. Not value, not importance, in the way command structures define those things. Something else. A line, drawn, crossed, recognized, even if not yet spoken. The word was forming, in reports, in minds, in the space between understanding and action. It had not been said out loud yet, but it would be, soon. Reckoning. It was a human word. Most species did not have a direct translation, not because they did not understand consequence, but because they had never needed to define it in quite that way. Not with that weight, not with that inevitability. Night settled over the moon. The sky shifted, from sick yellow to something darker, closer to black. The stars emerged, distant, unchanged. The line remained, even in the dark, even in the silence. Especially then. The footage reached Earth in 11 hours. That was as fast as it could move. A chain of relays stretching across systems, each one catching the signal, amplifying it, passing it forward. A network built over decades, designed to carry information across distances that had once made communication impossible. It didn't slow. It didn't pause. It didn't ask permission. By the time it arrived, the initial report had already been received. Colonel Vance's transmission, Lorenz Si's observer file, fragments of data that suggested something had gone wrong. The footage made it undeniable. It entered the system quietly. No alarms, no priority override. Just another file in a queue that processed thousands every hour, until someone watched it. Senior analyst Undy opened the file as part of standard review, routine, verification of reported incidents, cross-checking data streams, ensuring consistency between sources. She watched the first 30 seconds, paused, sat still for a moment, then stood up, left her station without closing the file, walked directly to the office of General Haruto Mace. She did not knock. She entered. He looked up. 61 years old. White hair cut short. Face controlled. The kind of control that comes from decades of practice. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer. She moved to the display, loaded the footage, pressed play. He watched, did not interrupt, did not speak. The room was silent except for the audio track, the ceasefire tone, the shots, the absence that followed. When it ended, he said, "Play it again." She did. He watched it a second time. Same expression, same stillness. When it ended again, he said, "Get me the Secretary General." The Secretary General watched it 30 minutes later, in a secure room, with the same silence, the same lack of immediate reaction. By the following morning, 22 heads of state and colonial governors had seen it. By the evening, it had reached others. Some who were meant to see it, some who were not, because information moved the way it always did. Once released, it spread, through official channels, through unofficial ones, through systems that were designed to contain it and systems that were designed to expose it. No one could stop that. No one tried. The UN War Council was called into emergency session. The chamber filled quickly. Delegates arriving from Earth, from colonies, from stations where signal delay meant some of them were present only through screens that lagged a few seconds behind real time. Ambassador Dhari 7 arrived early. Observer status granted. He took his place above the chamber floor. Watched. That was what he did. Observed. Recorded. Interpreted. The delegates entered. One by one. Two by two. They did not speak much. That was the first deviation. Normally, there would be conversation, positioning, small exchanges that established alliances and disagreements before anything official began. Today, there was none. They came in. They sat down. They looked forward. Their movements were different. Dhari 7 noted it. Wrote it down. Like soldiers, he thought. Even those who had never been soldiers. Something in the way they carried themselves. He had seen it before. In other contexts. After certain types of events. The session opened. Secretary General Addis, Obi, stood at the head of the chamber. She did not give a speech. "You have all seen the footage," she said. "There is nothing for me to add." She paused. "The question before this council is how we respond." She stepped back. The floor opened. The first delegate stood. Martian colonies. Known for careful, measured analysis. Long speeches. Balanced arguments. He said, "This is not acceptable." Sat down. The next stood. European Federation. "I second that position." Sat down. Dhari 7 noted it. This was not standard procedure. There was no debate, no counterpoint, no attempt to refine the statement. Just agreement. Delegate after delegate stood. Some spoke, briefly. Some did not. One referenced the Geneva Convention, quoted articles, protected classes, the wounded, the healers, the surrendered. Another explained the concept for the record. Not because it was needed, because it had to be said, out loud, in this room, at this moment. A representative from the Pacific Coalition stood, said nothing, nodded once, sat down. The nod was recorded as a vote. Dhari 7 checked historical data. Unanimous votes were rare. 31 years since the last one. Before that, longer. Humans argued. It was part of their nature, part of their identity. They disagreed, even when they agreed, especially then. Today they did not. The vote was called. The result was immediate. Unanimous. Dhari 7 wrote it down, checked it again, confirmed. Unanimous. He left the gallery before the session formally ended, moved into the corridor, found a quiet space, opened a channel, composed his message. Faster than usual, less careful, because something in him was pushing past his normal processes. "The War Council vote has passed," he wrote. "Unanimous." He paused, considered, continued. "They have authorized what they are calling Protocol Nemesis." He stopped again, thought about the word. Nemesis. He knew it. From human history, from mythology. Retribution. Balance enforced. Not negotiation. Not deterrence. Something else. "This is not escalation," he wrote. "Escalation is an increase in scale. This is a change in category." He continued, "Over 30 years, I have studied human responses to conflict. I have observed grief, retaliation, negotiation. This is none of those. I am not certain I have a category for what I am observing." He paused, then added, "The closest term I can identify is purpose. Not emotional, not strategic. Purposeful in the way a river becomes purposeful when a dam is removed." He sent the message. Stood there for a moment, thinking. Back in the chamber. The session concluded. Orders were issued. Quietly, efficiently. No speeches. No declarations. Just action. Across human-controlled space. Signals began to change. At first, it was subtle. Patterns in communication. Frequency shifts. Code structures altering. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would trigger immediate concern. But the analysts noticed. That was their role. To notice changes. to track patterns, to build models that predicted behavior based on those patterns. For 11 years, those models had worked. 70% accuracy, reliable, useful. Now they began to fail. The predictions stopped aligning with reality. Fleet movements didn't match expected objectives. Signal classifications changed. Encryption methods shifted. Analysts worked to adapt, to decode, to understand. Within 2 weeks, they cracked enough to read the headers. The classification at the top of each transmission. One word, repeated, consistent. They translated it, checked across multiple human languages, confirmed. Punitive. The lead analyst brought the report in person. That, by itself, was unusual. Reports were normally transmitted, filed, reviewed through systems. She stood before the breath high command, placed the translation on the table. I want to ensure the command understands the context, she said. Punitive does not indicate strategic objective. The admiral looked at the word. They are acting for psychological effect, he said. She shook her head. I do not believe that is correct. He looked up. Then, what do you believe? She considered, chose her words. I believe they are no longer trying to win the war. Silence. In the room. Around the table. They have changed the question, she continued. The war has been about territory, containment, expansion. She gestured to the word. This is not about territory. What is it about? The admiral asked. She met his gaze. What happens to the people responsible for Year 4? The room remained still. No one spoke immediately. She added quietly, that is the only question they are answering now. She paused. Then more carefully, we did not model for this. She looked around the table. At no point in 11 years of conflict analysis did we include this scenario. Her voice stayed level. I do not have a prediction. She stepped back, left the report on the table. The word remained there. Punitive, simple, clear, inadequate to fully describe what it represented, but close enough. Across the systems, human fleets began to move, not toward territory, not toward supply lines, not in formations designed to take and hold ground. Small groups, fast, unpredictable, patterns that did not align with known strategic models. Analysts tried to map them, overlay them against star charts, look for logic. There was none, not the kind they understood. Then one of them tried something else, overlaid the movements against the breath command structure, against the chain of command from Year 4, the list of ships, the list of officers, the list of everyone involved. The pattern appeared immediately, clear, direct, impossible to misinterpret. They were not advancing. They were not retreating. They were not maneuvering for position. They were moving toward specific targets, one at a time, name by name. The analyst stared at the display, ran the overlay again, and again. Same result. She filed her report, carefully, professionally, described the pattern, outlined the implications. At the end, she added a line. Not standard, not required, but necessary. They know who is involved, she wrote. They know all of them. She paused, then added, I do not know how. Sent the report, sat back. Outside the station, the stars remained unchanged, cold, distant, unconcerned, but something was moving among them now, not randomly, not chaotically, purposefully, like something that had already decided what it was going to do and was now doing it, one name at a time. The first prisoners came back 2 weeks later. There were 30 of them, breath soldiers, captured during a small engagement near the outer edge of the Yeren system. The kind of fight that had been happening for years. Limited scope, limited casualties, the kind that didn't change anything. Under normal conditions, they would have been processed, cataloged, held, eventually exchanged. There were systems for that, agreements, procedures. Both sides followed them, because it made the war manageable, predictable, structured. The compact border station prepared for that process. Files were opened, identifications confirmed, units recorded, standard, routine. Then the transport arrived. Early, before the documentation was complete, before the system had time to process what had been captured. The ship was marked. Medical symbols. Clear, visible, recognized. It transmitted a short message. No signature, no designation, just text. These soldiers are returned without condition. Pause. The chips are for them, not for you. That was all. The station commander read it. Once. Then again. He did not immediately understand the second part. The chips. 30 small data units. Issued individually. Sealed. Not encrypted. Just protected against damage. Standard material. Nothing unusual. He ordered them held. For analysis. Procedure required it. Unknown data devices were not distributed without verification. His team opened one. The seal broke easily. The file inside was simple. Single recording. No compression. No obfuscation. No attempt to hide content. They played it. The commander watched. He had read the reports. He knew what had happened at Year 4. But seeing it, that was different. The ceasefire tone. The white markings. The movement across the field. Then the shots. One after another. Systematic. Controlled. The fall. The silence. He let the recording finish. Did not speak. Did not move for several seconds after it ended. Then he closed the file. Looked at the remaining 29 chips. All identical. All containing the same thing. He thought about the message. The chips are for them. Not for command. Not for analysis. For the soldiers. He ordered them distributed. Each of the 30 received one. No explanation. No instruction. Just the device. Given to them directly. The commander filed his report. Clear. Accurate. Return of prisoners without condition. Distribution of data units as requested. In the observation section, he hesitated. There was no standard classification for this. No category that fit. He wrote anyway. I do not believe this is a strategic action. He paused. Then added. I do not know what kind of action it is. He submitted the report. Moved on. But the line remained. In the file. In the system. In the space where something had happened that did not align with known patterns. Across the compact, similar reports began to accumulate. Small engagements. Prisoners taken. Prisoners returned. Always the same. Treated. Fed. Stabilized. Then released. With a chip. Always the same recording. No variation. No modification. The same moment. Repeated. Delivered. Serene Voss read all of them. She had the kind of position where information collected, where patterns emerged, where things that looked isolated in one report became something else when viewed together. She stood in front of the display in her office. Data spread across it. Fleet movements. Signal logs. Engagement summaries. Prisoner returns. All of it. She had built her career on understanding war. Not just the mechanics. The structure. The shape. The way actions connected to outcomes. She was rarely surprised. She was surprised now. The humans were not taking territory. Not consolidating positions. Not expanding control. They had stopped interacting with the map. That was the first thing. The second was the pattern. She overlaid the fleet movements against the breath command structure. The same overlay the analyst had run. The same result. Clear. Direct. They were targeting individuals. Specific. Identified. Not units. Not formations. People. Commanders. Officers. Personnel linked to Year 4. She stared at the display. Let the pattern settle. She had studied 60 different civilizations' approaches to warfare. Different doctrines. Different priorities. Different definitions of victory. She did not have a case study for this. She moved to her desk. Began writing. Humans appear to have two concepts that translate to our word for justice. She paused. Considered. Continued. One is balance, proportion, restoration of a disrupted state. She wrote the next line more slowly. The other is something else. She searched for the translation, the closest approximation, settlement of an account that cannot be left unsettled. She leaned back slightly, looked at the words, then added, "They have a word for it." She typed it. Reckoning. She sent the analysis, requested a meeting, marked it urgent. The compact was not unified. It was an alliance. That mattered. Decisions were slower, less direct, more complicated. But sometimes a single event cut through that. The Keth were the first to respond. They had long memories, long enough to remember what happened when certain lines were crossed. Their ambassador requested a formal session, arrived with a prepared statement, delivered it without deviation. "We do not support the actions taken at Year 4. Clear, direct, no qualification. We were not informed. We were not consulted." Pause. Then, "We recognize this as a violation of protected class." The room was quiet. She continued, "We have a word for this." She gave it, in her language, old, predating their expansion into space. The removal of a being from war. She let that settle. When a being is removed from war, they are no longer part of it. She looked around the room. Killing them is not a military act. Pause. It is something else. She stepped back. We do not participate in something else. She requested negotiations with the humans. Immediate. Bilateral. Then she left. The Dahari followed within 6 days. Their reasoning was different. More pragmatic. Less moral. But the result aligned. They withdrew. Opened channels. Reduced their exposure. The alliance began to fracture. Not through conflict. Through separation. The breath remained. They had initiated the action. They maintained the position. They interpreted the situation through their own framework. Calculation. Efficiency. Threat reduction. They had not violated their logic. They had followed it. The consequences. Those were still being evaluated. The war changed shape. Not visibly. Not in the way battles mark change. Quietly. In the patterns. In the movements. In the absence of familiar behaviors. The humans continued. Systematic. Controlled. Precise. No deviation. No escalation beyond the defined pattern. No expansion beyond the list. The list. It existed. Somewhere. Complete. Accurate. They were working through it. One name at a time. The compact tried to respond. To adapt. To model. They failed. Their predictions did not align. Their responses did not intercept. Their understanding lagged behind the reality unfolding across their systems. The question shifted from, "How do we win this war?" to something else. Something smaller. More specific. More urgent. What happens to the people responsible for Year 4? That was the question now. Everything else was background. The Breath flagship was found drifting. It did not send a distress signal. It did not attempt to evade. It did not respond to hails. It simply existed. 14 kilometers of warship, suspended in open space, exactly where it should not have been, doing exactly nothing. The patrol that found it approached carefully. Standard procedure. Unknown condition. Unknown threat. Sensors scanned. Hull integrity. Intact. No visible damage. No breaches. No external impact marks. Power levels. Minimal, but present. Enough to sustain basic systems. Not enough to indicate active operation. The captain of the patrol vessel requested communication. No response. Repeated the request. No response. He followed protocol. Requested boarding authorization. Received none. Waited. Then made the decision. They crossed. Docked. Entered. The interior of the ship was unchanged. Lights functioning. Atmosphere stable. Temperature within operational range. No signs of emergency protocols. No alarms. No lockdown. Everything exactly as it should be. Except the crew. They were all there. Every station manned. Every position filled. Bridge, engineering, weapons control, corridors, quarters, all of them. Still, the boarding team moved through the ship slowly, systematically, weapons raised, not because they expected resistance, because the situation required caution. They found none. No movement, no threat, only the absence of life. Each body was exactly where it should have been, hands on controls, seated in command chairs, standing mid-task. No signs of struggle, no damage, no wounds, no indication of how it had happened. They had simply stopped. The captain reached the bridge. Sub-Executive Vrao sat in his command chair, the same position he had occupied when he gave the order, body upright, head slightly tilted forward, hands resting where they would have been during observation. He looked peaceful. The captain did not include that in his report at first. Then he did, because accuracy required it, because leaving it out would have been a distortion. He turned away, continued the inspection. The ship was silent, not damaged, not destroyed, just ended. When they exited, one of the officers noticed something on the hull. It had not been visible from a distance. The color matched the ship, blended, but up close. It was there. Markings, large, deliberate, applied across the surface, in material designed to withstand vacuum, radiation resistant, long-lasting, years, centuries, possibly longer. The captain moved closer. Read it. Once. Then again. The message was written in multiple languages. Every major compact dialect. 17 human languages. Each translation precise. Consistent. The same words. This is what happens when you kill the wounded. He stared at it, then recorded it. Verbatim. The report moved quickly. Faster than most. Because it could not be classified as routine. Because there was no category for it. It reached high command. It reached the remaining compact leadership. It reached news networks. It spread. Because this time, no one tried to contain it. There was no advantage in doing so, no narrative that could absorb it. It existed, and it was seen. Serene Voss read the report over breakfast. She stopped eating, did not resume. She read it again, focused on the details. 14 kilometers. Full crew. No damage. No trace. She considered the implications. Not emotional. Not immediate. Structural. What it meant. What it required. To locate that ship, to access it, to neutralize every individual on board without resistance, without leaving evidence, without triggering alarms, then to leave, and take the time to write a message, not for command, not for immediate effect, for permanence. 3,000 years. That was the estimate for the material. They had not written it for now. They had written it for later, for anyone who came across that ship, for anyone who wondered what had happened, for anyone who needed to understand the rule. She set the report down, looked out the window. Space beyond. Stars. Unchanged. But the pattern had shifted. She picked up her communicator. "Get me a direct channel to human command," she said. Her aide hesitated. "That requires—" "I am authorizing it." Pause. "Yes, Admiral." The connection would take time. Protocols. Clearance. Verification. She knew that. While she waited, she returned to the reports. The prisoner returns. The chips. The footage. She had initially categorized it as communication. A message. A demonstration. "We will fight you, but we will not be like you." That had been her first assessment. She revised it. Looked again. Not as communication. As design. What did it do? Not to command. To the individual. 30 soldiers. Returned. Each given the same recording. No force. No instruction. Just. Hear. See. Understand. She considered the impact. A soldier returning home. Holding that. Knowing what had been done. Knowing what the enemy had done in response. Not through threat. Through action. Through restraint. Through precision. She added a section to her analysis. Observations on Human Strategic Patience. She wrote, "Humans are not operating within a strategic frame. Pause. They are operating within a moral frame." She continued, "Strategic frameworks prioritize efficiency. Moral frameworks prioritize correctness." She leaned back. "Read it." Then added, "An enemy operating within a moral frame does not ask what is optimal. They ask what is right." She paused, then finished, "This is more difficult to predict, more difficult to counter, more difficult to exhaust." She sent the update, then added one final line, "Not required, but necessary. I have studied war for my entire adult life." Pause. "I would not want to be on the wrong side of this." She closed the file, looked back at the pending channel request. Still processing. Outside, nothing had changed. Stars, silence, distance. But within that, movement continued. Human fleets did not stop. They did not slow. They did not deviate. The list remained. They were working through it, one name at a time. No announcement, no declaration, no escalation beyond the defined pattern. Just completion. Elsewhere, in a secured room, the question was finally asked. Direct, unavoidable. Can we survive this? No one answered immediately, because the answer required calculation, projection, models. They ran them, updated variables, adjusted for new data. The result came back. Not precise, not absolute, but sufficient. No, the word did not need to be spoken. It was understood, and once understood, the next step became clear. Not victory, not advantage. Survival required something else. A different action, a different decision. The war had changed, not in scale, in nature. And nature, once changed, did not return easily. It moved forward until something stopped it, or satisfied it, whichever came first. The meeting was arranged at Meridian Point. It was not a place built for war. It had been a trade station once. Long before the conflict, back when first contact still felt like discovery instead of calculation, when different species met because they were curious, not because they needed to negotiate boundaries. The structure had changed over time, expanded, reinforced, repurposed. Now it was neutral ground, a place where people came when they needed to speak to the other side without weapons involved. It was worn, not damaged, used. You could see it in the surfaces, in the way different architectural styles overlapped without fully blending, in the marks left behind by decades of traffic from beings who moved differently, thought differently, built differently. It was functional. That was enough. Serene Voss arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. That mattered. Timing was part of communication. She brought 2 aides, 1 security officer. The officer remained outside. That also mattered. Inside the room, there was a table. Long, plain, no displays active, no recording devices visible, though both sides assumed there were systems in place. There always were. General Tobias Wren arrived 2 minutes early. She noted that, stored it. He stood when she entered. Another detail, small, but not irrelevant. He was older than she had expected, not physically weak, but settled, like someone who had been in position long enough that they no longer needed to prove it. His expression was controlled, not neutral, not blank, just still. They sat across from each other. The aides took positions along the walls, silent, observing. Water had been placed on the table. Neither of them touched it. Voss had prepared opening remarks, structured, diplomatic, language designed to establish boundaries, to define the conversation before it began. She looked at him, then set them aside. "I'm going to skip the preliminary part," she said. He nodded. "I agree." That was enough. She went directly to the question. "Is there anything we can give you that stops this before there are no breath left?" The room held that. No reaction from the aides. No shift in posture. But the weight of the words was there. Rin did not answer immediately. He looked at her. Not evaluating. Not measuring. Considering. He had been thinking about this. Long before this meeting. Every morning. The same way. 41 names. He had memorized them. Not as a gesture. Not as a ritual. As a decision. Someone in command should know who they were. Not what they were. Who? Private Dara Ohin. Medic First Class Yusef Abra. Corporal Lena Marchetti. He knew their ages. Their origins. Their service records. He had read their files. Some of their letters. With permission. He had wanted to understand them as individuals. Not entries. Not statistics. People. He thought about them now. Briefly. Then returned to the present. We want the breath high command, he said. Clear. Direct. The officers in the chain of command from Vral down. No hesitation. Everyone who gave the order passed it. Or carried it out. Voss held his gaze. To be tried, she said. Not a question. A confirmation. Yes. Under human law. Yes. By human judges. Yes. She leaned back slightly. Processing. The implications were not small. Jurisdiction. Authority. Acceptance of external legal framework. This was not a tactical concession. This was structural. The Geneva Convention, she said. He nodded. That is a 400-year-old human document. Yes. You are asking us to accept it as binding. Yes. Silence. She thought through the layers. Political. Military. Cultural. The breath would refuse. That was not speculation. That was certainty. The breath will not agree, she said. That is their decision. And if they refuse? He did not answer immediately. He looked at her, then said, Then we finish the list. 3 words. No emphasis. No threat. No performance. Just. Statement. She recognized it. The difference between a threat and a fact. This was not something being said to influence behavior. It was something being said because it was true. She believed him. She said so. I believe you. I know, he replied. The room remained still. No one moved. No one interrupted. She shifted. Give me time, she said. We are not stopping, he answered. I understand that. How much time? She calculated. Not abstractly. Not theoretically. Casualty projections. Fleet strength. Command structure. Decision timelines. 3 weeks. That was the window. 3 weeks, she said. He nodded once. Agreement. Not negotiated. Acknowledged. They stood. Simultaneously. She extended her hand. A human gesture. He took it. Held. Released. The meeting ended. No formal closing. No summary. Nothing left to say. Outside the room, her aide spoke. What did you agree to? Nothing, she said. Pause. Yet. The Breath High Command session lasted 9 days. She was not present. No one from her side was. Internal process. They did not share it, but information leaked. Fragments. Summaries. Enough to understand the shape of the discussion. It was not about whether Year 4 had been wrong. Within their framework, it had not. It had been logical, efficient, correct. The question was not about the past. It was about the future. What happens now? A junior admiral reframed it, cut through the circular arguments. We are not debating doctrine, she said. We are not debating logic. Pause. We are deciding if we can survive what is coming. Silence. That was the correct question. The projections were requested, displayed, reviewed. No one argued with the numbers. They did not need to. The conclusion was implicit. They could not. Not without unacceptable loss. Not without structural collapse. The decision followed. Not unanimous, but sufficient. 43 names were compiled. The chain of command. From Vral. Down. Those still alive. 42. Plus 1. Vral himself. Deceased. His name included. Not as a defendant. As evidence. The transfer was arranged. Meridian point. 12 days after the meeting. 3 days ahead of the deadline. That was deliberate, not compliance. Decision. The processing was formal, documented, observed. Ren was present. So was Voss. She stood beside him. Not required. Chosen. Symbol. When the last of the 42 had been transferred, he turned to her. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. "Don't thank me." Pause. "Make sure this never happens again." He nodded. "That's the next conversation." "Then let's have it." They did. Over days. Same room. Same table. More participants. Keth. Dahari. Observers. They discussed law. Framework. Enforcement. The Geneva Convention. Ren brought a physical copy. Paper. Worn. Handled. Not necessary, but intentional. It sat on the table. Read. Referenced. Understood. This is about protection. One of them said. Yes. We can agree in principle. I need more than principle. They worked through it. Slow. Detailed. Precise. What happens if someone violates it? The room paused. Considered. Then the answer came. Everyone responds. Not one side. Not the injured party alone. All signatories. Collective enforcement. That was new. That was necessary. Agreement formed. Not quickly, but solidly. On the 4th day, Ren added one more condition. 41 names, he said. The room went quiet. They need to be in the document. Not as history, as reason, as the stated cause. Pause. They should not be forgotten. Agreement followed. Simple. Clear. The breath observer left that day. Returned a note the next. They would not sign. Not yet. Not with current command. Ren read it. Considered. He tracked the operation daily. The list. The progress. The remaining names. He estimated 6 months for them to change. He was wrong. It took 7. When they returned, it was with new leadership. The old command was gone. Standing trial. The delegate who arrived had authority. Spoke. Briefly. We are ready to sign. No elaboration. No justification. Understanding was implied. The signing was formal. Observed. Recorded. Each delegation placed their seal. One by one. The document was completed. A line written centuries ago. Now extended. Expanded. Shared. Rin stood at the back of the room. Watched. Did not speak. Did not react. He thought about the 41, as he did every morning. By name. One at a time. He did not allow his expression to change. That was not his role. He was command. He remained still. The signatures were placed. The line held. And the war. Changed again. This time, toward something that could end. The trials began without ceremony. There were no speeches. No declarations. No audience beyond those required to be present. The chamber was functional. Plain. Built for process. Not spectacle. 42 seats. Occupied. Each one marked. Each one assigned. Each one carrying a name that had already been written down in more places than any of the individuals who sat there would ever fully know. Ren entered last. Not as a judge. Not as counsel. Observer. That was his designation. He took his place, along the wall. Same position he had taken in meetings. Same stillness. Same control. The judges entered. 3 of them. Human. Selected for this. Not for rank. For experience. For understanding. Law. War. The space where those 2 things met. The lead judge spoke. Voice calm. Measured. This is not a trial of nations. Pause. This is a trial of individuals. She let that settle. No one here is responsible for the actions of others. Another pause. Each of you is responsible for your own. The translation systems carried her words across languages. Clean. Precise. No distortion. The first case was called. A breath officer, mid-level, had passed the order. Not initiated. Not executed directly, but part of the chain. Evidence was presented. Recordings. Transmissions. logs. The order moving, step by step, from vral, through command, down to execution. The officer did not deny it. There was no point. The evidence was complete. He explained. Logic, efficiency, threat reduction. The same framework, the same reasoning. It was consistent. It always had been. The judge listened, did not interrupt. When he finished, she asked one question. Did you know they were wounded? Yes. Did you know they were protected under ceasefire? Pause. Yes. Then why did you pass the order? He hesitated. Not long. A fraction of a second. Processing. Then, because it was logical. She nodded. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Logic is not the standard here, she said. Silence. The standard is law. The distinction held. Clear. Unambiguous. The verdict followed. Guilty. The sentence was delivered. Not death. That had been decided before the trials began. Death was immediate. Finite. It ended the process. This was not about ending. It was about completion. Permanent removal from command. Permanent confinement. Lifetime. The officer did not react. Not visibly. He was removed. The next case began. And the next. And the next. The process did not change. Evidence. Statement. Question. Verdict. Sentence. Repetition. Consistency. No deviation. Ren watched. He did not speak. Did not move. He noted the patterns. The way each individual responded. Some with logic. Some with silence. Some attempting to reframe. None denying. Denial required uncertainty. There was none. The recordings ensured that. On the third day, a Dahari observer spoke, during recess. Quietly. To Run. This is not how we conduct trials. No, Rin said. It is not. You are not seeking information. No. Then what are you seeking? Rin considered. Chose the simplest answer. An end to it. The Dahari studied him. Then nodded. Understanding. Not agreement, but something close. On the fifth day, the Keth delegation requested a transcript. Not for analysis. For record. They did not comment. They did not ask questions. They watched. That was enough. On the seventh day, the final case was called. Sub-Executive Rao. His seat was empty. His name was still spoken. His actions still presented. His decision. His reasoning. His order. The chain. Complete. The judge looked at the empty seat. Then at the record. Guilty, she said. The word carried. Even without a body to receive it. The sentence was entered. Not confinement. Not removal. Recognition. Of what had been done. Of what it meant. The trial concluded. No applause. No reaction. Just. End. The 42 were processed. Moved. Contained. Their names remained. Recorded. Attached to the event. Not erased. Not hidden. Part of the record. As intended. Ren left the chamber. Walked out into the corridor. Voss was there. Waiting. She did not ask how it went. She already knew. He stopped beside her. It's done, he said. She nodded. That part is. They stood there, side by side, looking through the transparent panel into open space beyond the station. Ships moved in the distance. Traffic. Routine. Normal. It looked. Unchanged. It wasn't. The list, she asked. He had it. Always. Updated. Current. He checked. Only out of habit. He already knew. Completed, he said. She exhaled. Slow. Measured. Not relief. Not entirely. Something else. Release. Of tension that had been held for months. Years. Then we're finished, she said. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about it. The trials. The list. The 41. He ran through the names. As he always did. Private Dara Ohin. Medic First Class. Yusef Abra. Corporal Lena Marchetti. All of them. One by one. He reached the end. Then said, "We're done with that." She looked at him. "Which means?" He met her gaze. "Now we make sure it stays done." She nodded. Agreement. They turned. walked back, toward the chamber. There was more to do. There always was. But this part, had reached its end. Across human space, the fleets slowed, then stopped. Not recalled, not withdrawn. They simply ceased movement. Orders changed. Classifications updated. The word that had defined operations for months, punitive, was removed, replaced. Standard, routine. The war returned. Not the same. It could not be. But closer, contained, structured. The line held. It had been broken. It had been enforced. Now it existed in a different way. Not just written. Not just agreed. Understood. Across species. Across systems. Something had been established. Not through negotiation. Through action. Through consequence. Through completion. Years later, Meridian Point added a small structure. Not large. Not central. Placed along a corridor that saw regular traffic, but was not part of any official route. It contained 41 names. No titles. No ranks. No descriptions. Just names. In multiple languages. Each one translated. Each one exact. People passed it. Some stopped. Some did not. Those who did, read. Quietly. Then moved on. There was no ceremony attached to it. No scheduled observance. It did not require attention. It existed. That was enough. A Keth historian visited once. Stood there for a long time. Then recorded a note. In our history, lines are taught. Pause. Here, they are shown. The note was added to the archive. Filed. Stored. Accessible. Like everything else. On the moon that had no name anyone cared about, the ground remained the same. Cracked. Dry. Unchanged. And no one fought over it anymore. There was no reason to. The line had moved. Not physically. Conceptually. Away from the surface. Into something else. Something harder to see. Harder to cross. Because now, everyone knew what happened when it was. The sky above it still carried that same dull light. The same empty stretch. But the silence was different. Not lighter. Not softer. Just different. Because it no longer carried the same question. Why are we here? That had been answered. And the answer was written. In law. In memory. In names. 41 of them. Enough.